Welcome to the archive. In today's discourse episode, Connor and I discuss a ton of different topics, ranging from ethics and our moral responsibility as people, and how that correlates to our direct awareness and our ability to actually make change in our lives. We talk a little bit about my own personal philosophical writings for my books, The Mirror House. We talk a little bit about Schopenhauer and the nature of reality and pessimism versus optimism, and how to be a better person, how to not take things personally, how to actually act upon the world around you and make tangible change from a place of the willpower instead of being an automatic reflection of the environment around you, and how to cease the perpetual nonsense that occurs and all of the negativity that occurs, and to promote goodness and love and positive change in your environment and in your own mind, heart, and soul, and body, as well as a number of other things. So with that, we hope that you enjoy this episode as much as we did recording it. And with that, let's jump right in. So I just killed a spider.
Yeah, you did.
In the archive studio.
I watched you do it.
And I felt kind of weird about it. Because, hunting is a sport. People kill for sport. We do all these things.
Yeah, but you're not going to eat that spider.
I'm not going to eat it, so I just literally killed it for no reason. I mean, there's reason.
Well, it was in your space.
Right? And normally, okay, so it's hit or miss, man. Like, sometimes I'll save the spiders, and sometimes I'll kill them, and it really just depends on what mood I'm in that moment.
Well, I think it depends on how convenient it is for you at that moment. Like, if you don't have a lot going on, you might be more likely to be like, oh, I'll take the extra 2 minutes to put it outside. I
mean, but that makes me feel terrible, though. That makes me just feel like a Neanderthal to some degree. Because, it's everybody love everybody. We got to love everything. But it's like the question of, okay, the first thing I want to say is I tried to save all the spiders forever until I had a child, for one. And that completely switched around everything about my mentality on spiders. Because now when I see one, I don't think of the spider anymore. It's not like, oh, it's okay if you bite me, I'll be okay. I'm going to put you outside gently and we'll just be cool. Now it's more like, I can't trust that you won't bite my son because my son doesn't have the mental capacity to know not to go and just grab you frivolously.
Yeah, or potentially doesn't have the immune system that can fight it
to
off.
withstand it.
Yeah.
So now I'm like, okay, well, now there's a risk that I'm not necessarily willing to take for your expense, little spider, so I have to kill you. So I think there's this biological function, right, where it's like self-preservation and preservation of your family, which is beautiful because it keeps us alive, but then it's also like really shitty because then it causes us to kill each other. Why can't I just like press a button and be God and put on like Iron Man armor, like Iron Man suit, and just make sure that nothing could ever happen to me or my son, and then spider can live all day because it doesn't matter to me anymore. I kind of think about that sometimes. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest ever recorded human epic poem ever came out of Sumer. Gilgamesh is like 2/3 God, 1/3 man, or something like that. And he's fucking huge. He's just big. And when you look at the old Sumerian tablets and you look at like imagery and iconography, these dudes are just so big. They're literally holding lions like they're kittens.
Right.
And if nothing in the natural world could startle you or make you feel like it was a threat, you could at that point make a decision from a moral standpoint to allow those things to live.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm kind of picking up what you're trying to make a metaphor for is that if we could all just, and this is like an integral idea, if we could all just accept that certain ideas should live instead of trying to necessarily sway the other person, or maybe to take it a step further, if everybody could step outside of themselves and realize that everybody has the same motivations, would we really fight each other and kill each other at the level that we do?
Right. I mean, yeah. So almost.
But you see what I was going with
level.
The metaphor with the ideas.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's like if we could afford to see the world like that, then the world would be a better
But there's
place.
utility in having in biology and being biologically connected to other creatures. Like, this is my son. I made him.
Because we can't afford it.
Right.
Like if I could, that's why I bring up the Sumerian epic. If I could be impervious to a spider bite, or if it would bite me and it would hurt me, but I know it wouldn't kill me.
Right.
And then I could make a moral decision. Okay, if I ever get bit by a spider or stung by a bee or whatever, I will just accept that. It's a pain that I'm going through. It's transitory and it'll pass and I'll heal. So any spider that I ever find ever can live. And if I kill them, then it's sort of like a moral dilemma because I'm taking away this whole thing's life such that I might simply just not be in pain.
Well,
or for trophy hunting, it's like I'm killing this thing just so I can have some sport and have a high. Or there's just like the high of going and chasing and killing, this weird biological process that is ingrained into us for millions of years.
Well, you're also killing that spider knowing that you have the option to put it outside, which makes the chances of you or your son or your wife getting bit by the spider pretty much zero.
But that's why I mean, like, if we could afford it, and we can't. Like, I guess it's like I wish the world was more ideal and human beings were not as fleshy and susceptible to corruption or damage or whatever, because then we could make better decisions about how to treat others in the world. I can't afford to allow my son be bitten by that spider, so I feel the need to kill it. So
Right.
There's this biological thing. There's this thing that's beyond my control.
Yeah. Well, that's how wars get started. It's sometimes it's not because necessarily one tribe is threatening the other tribe or one nation is threatening the other nation. It's like that paranoia that, well, what if they do?
Exactly.
What if they do attack me? Then I'm
can
the
I
one.
afford it?
Yeah.
Can America afford to sit down and wait for our enemies to plot against us? Or how proactive do we have to be at going out in the world and making all these things happen?
Right.
It's that whole question, right? Because we're fallible, we're human, we're fleshy sacks of water and bones and meat and stuff. That's something that I think about often, though. When we spoke with Uberboyo, or I spoke with Uberboyo, hopefully Uberboyo will come on the channel, but when I spoke with Uberboyo on Isaac's episode on the Daily Archetype, shout out to Isaac, we'll link him in the description. Mm-hmm. We talked about this, where one day, and I'm not going to put too much of his information out there into the world. For anybody who doesn't know Uberboyo, he's a guy who talks about Jungian psychology, like, all day.
And Nietzsche
with his own twist on things, which is really cool.
Yeah.
He's a great guy. Go check out his channel. He's from Ireland. So if you've spent your entire life in the United States, it's a cool other alternative perspective on things.
Right.
But he was talking about an experience that he had in which he saw a bumblebee on the ground or some sort of animal, and it was an insect that normally he would kill, and then he got this insight to save it, and it reminded him of Jesus, kind of, which Jesus, of course, is this ideal human, which isn't impervious, right? Jesus wasn't this image of being impervious.
Because he was able to be killed.
Right, he was a man, but he chose to sacrifice himself such that hopefully, everyone knows the story, like the whole world is saved or whatever in the Christian, Protestant, and Catholic doctrine.
The perfect human.
Yeah, it's like the perfect human minus it's like the perfect moral human.
Yes.
Because I'm talking about like this moral, ethical sort of responsibility we have to kill the spider and literally cause pain and suffering to some other animal or creature or insect, literally for self-preservation. But if we could get beyond the self-preservation step, then it becomes more of a moral decision because it's true choice. Because sometimes when it's a biological I'm going to survive thing, you're under duress, right? Schopenhauer talks often about free will and
the will to live
and the intellect. And so most of the time we're just slaves to this will to live that's bigger than us, that we are smaller than and we can't do anything about. So I kill the spider in order that I might live. So I'm a little bit absolved of a moral repercussion there. Just in the same way that if I have a gun against your head and I say kill the person in front of you, and you kill the person in front of you, and I don't kill you then, and you get to walk, at what level are you responsible for the decision that you made because you didn't make it of your own free will and volition, right?
So I wouldn't have done it if there wasn't outside or external pressure put on me. Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying, how much can I afford to make decisions that affect other creatures in my life in a way that puts me ahead on the moral compass, I suppose.
Right.
Something I think about often, and it came about with me just killing that spider. So
the metaphor that I think about is like driving, right? Like when you're protected from the reactions that people would normally give you for your behavior in real life situations. That's why everyone always says driving brings out the worst in you, because you don't have to face that immediate consequence. You can kind of just drive off and maybe
ignore it, dissociate
ignore it or forget about it the next second. And you kind of, and we all do it, right?
Sure.
We kind of like claim that moral rightness, like, oh, he shouldn't have cut me off that way.
Flick him off immediately.
And it,
be an immediate like reaction to your environment, and, like not even think about it at all.
But then you have to wonder, like, how much are you really affecting? I guess I think what the question that you're asking is that how much do we as individuals, by the means of how we treat each other, affect the overarching structure of everything.
Well, ultimately, ultimately in my personal worldview, it's like we should try our best to harmonize with all things. Hence the union of opposites. Hence like discourse and talking with people and trying to come to conclusions across spectrums of difference. And ultimately, like that's what we should do. But how able-bodied are we to actually do that is the question, I guess. Because we want that, but it's like we're limited by our circumstances and our bodies and our biology and our mental constructs and our social constructs. There's like we're not just gods in a vacuum where we can just do whatever we want. We are limited by our circumstance.
Right.
So trying to figure out the best way to do that is what I'm all about. And just like killing a spider sometimes versus not other times, or going and shooting a deer sometimes. And
right. Well, I think a lot of people want things.
Yeah.
But it's to actually take the actions that lead to those things is really hard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For sure.
Daniel Tosh has a joke where he's like, I always wanted to be famous, but he's like, but then at the same time, like used to wonder, like, why doesn't someone just drive up to me and say, here's a Lamborghini?
Yeah, no doubt, right.
Because
the secret.
It's easy to want. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's easy to want something. It's hard to like take the actions to.
Yeah, no doubt. I want to eat less meat every day, right? I want to.
For me, it's just factory farmed meat that I try to stay away from, but I still indulge in it sometimes because
it's right in front of you,
in the aura, and also like in the aura of other people that I love who are doing it. I don't want to be like the outlier, or the weirdo.
There's so many reasons why we do things versus not do things, right? Why we make certain decisions. And Aristotle always said, I think it even began with Socrates: the unexamined life is not worth living.
Yep.
And so much of the time we just do things. There's just traditions that we follow. For anybody listening right now or watching, we literally just recorded an episode where we talked about absolutism versus relativism.
Right.
And we went over traditions and people just doing things for whatever reason. And I think we should just like scrutinize our own actions. We should just really look at ourselves. Like, why did I just kill that spider? Obviously it's because my son and all these things. But if we can start to like look at those things a little bit closer, then we can make decisions from a realm of simply a place of our willful efforts instead of just being an unconscious reaction to things. I know we've talked about this on other episodes as well. For anybody listening brand new, I always look at reality like a giant funhouse of mirrors where everyone is just like an unconscious reflection of everyone else. You're driving in traffic and you're in this giant metal box and you're protected from the rest of the world, so you get to dissociate and you don't really have to worry about others. It's just all about you. And then all of a sudden someone cuts you off in traffic and they flick you off and you have no idea why they did that. You thought you were being a good driver. You didn't realize maybe you cut them off, or who knows what you did.
Yeah.
But they flicked you off, and now you're upset and you immediately do the same thing back to them because their anger has effectively like truly reflected inside of you. You've internalized that experience and then unconsciously reflected it back out into your environment and flicked them back off. And probably they just did exactly the same thing to you that just happened to them. And we're just constantly reflections on all levels of reality.
Carl Jung once said the problems that we see in others are the problems that we have with ourselves.
Exactly that. Yeah. And so it's like trying to find a place in which you can act from a point of, okay, I'm internalizing this event that just occurred. I'm experiencing this thing, but I'm going to like run it through all my mental processes, and then I'm going to realize like, okay, I don't have to reflect it. I can choose to absorb it, transmute it into something that's different, maybe some like love energy, and choose to react differently to that situation. Maybe someone flicks you off like in the line at Walmart or something if they're that bold.
Yeah.
And instead of flicking them off, you walk up and you give them $5 and you say, I hope you have a better day.
Well, you know what? Not to get like too sappy or anything, but this is something that you really taught me. Like, I think I kind of maybe embodied it sometimes, and I kind of knew it in like inklings of the idea, but you really elucidated to me. You were like, well, sometimes when someone does something that is out of pocket or out of line, instead of being angry, you can kind of transmute it into pity.
Truly.
Like, I feel sorry for you that you have to react that way to this situation. And I choose to do that instead of being angry at you.
Yeah, it's like mental alchemy 101. There's so many applications of it, whether it's, physical discomfort or your emotional state or like how you view the world or whatever. Through the force of will and the intellect and reason, we can decide to be certain ways. We can decide to literally behave in certain ways. And and it takes effort and it takes practice, but in doing so, we become better. We can seek the ideal. We can go towards that Jesus figure. Although, of course, Jesus is an ideal reality is always out of reach. We can never actually grasp it or touch it. we can always aspire towards it.
Well, like, here's an experiment you can do. Like, there's someone in your life. I know there is. Whoever you are watching, I know there's someone in your life or listening who periodically does this thing to you that invokes this reaction, and it makes you angry and it makes you upset, and you spew out the same pathological reaction that you give them every time they do it to you. Try this out. Next time that happens, don't do it.
Just don't. Yeah,
just don't. Just do the opposite of that.
Just because you can, because you're a human being.
Because you're a scientist in your life, and you can experiment with your psychology and say, you know what? I've consistently done the same thing, and it clearly hasn't produced the right result because they're still doing it. I'm not going to do it this time, and just watch what happens. And it might not be. You might find that they still do it, but you know that you did the right thing.
You at least protected yourself. You at least kept your peace, right? Like, you yourself at least weren't affected by them. So there's a great book. We're going to do a book review on it called The Four Agreements. Four Agreements of Toltec Wisdom. It's an amazing book. I read it when I was 14 years old, and it changed my life. One of the main tenets of it is never take anything personally.
Right.
And if you realize that most of the time people are just unconsciously reflecting their environment, you can't help but like forgive them, because for the most part, if nothing or no one or nothing has ever like entered into their realm of consciousness to show them another way, they don't know any better. Right. It's like when to bring up Jesus was being crucified literally by the Jews, by his own people. And he said to God, his father in the Bible, he said, God, forgive these people, for they know not what they do. Like, they are undeserving of punishment because they're truly ignorant.
Right.
And so there's a question here that I want to unpack, which is, first, really quick, just to bring it back to not taking things personally. If you recognize that people don't know what they're doing to you, they're just unconsciously doing it. If you continue to reflect that into your environment, that's all that they're going to continue to consume.
Right.
And that's all they're going to continue to reflect. And all you do is perpetuate the processes that you hate and that just like cause pain and hurt and all of the stuff. So like, yes, we should aspire to like consciously take in and absorb those things, make a personal sacrifice, and then just reflect love back into the world, or whatever it is that we consciously want to see. If you want to see hatred in the world, then consciously reflect hatred.
Sure.
But I'm not about it.
Right.
If you want to see betterment in the world, then consciously reflect that. And it's a huge concept and it takes a lot of effort. But when I was 14, that book really changed my life, not taking things personally. And again, you transmute their anger, and the anger that you immediately feel as a reflection of them, you can transmute that into pity for them or love or whatever it is that you want through your intellect, reason, and will. And there's a lot to be said about that too. Reflection exists on all levels. So the mental level, the emotional level, the physical level, like you are a reflection of your environment in all spectrums. And that's very AQAL, Ken Wilber, integral theory, like union of opposites-esque. But with that being said, I think that there's this question of morality, and there's so much to unpack with this whole concept being better.
What do you even call this concept? I mean, how would you?
I mean, truly, it's just the fun house of mirrors. I don't have a real name for it yet.
That might be the name of the episode.
Oh, whoa. So yeah, I mean, the concept of funhouse mirrors, like a mirror funhouse, whatever you would call that at the carnival. Like, I really don't know what that's called. Just like the funhouse of mirrors, right?
Right.
Like, that's literally what they're called. That is a concept that I've been lacing into my first book. So I shout out to my books a lot. I know it sucks. Like, I don't have anything really for people to listen to yet, but truly they're in the works. It's in book 1. So I'm just going to bookmark that for later. But to bring up forgiving other people for the fact that they are ignorant, there comes a question of moral responsibility in the way of they have been introduced to the way or the path. Someone has given them the tools, and they have, through whatever reason, like drug abuse or their biology or their upbringing, or literally they're just ostentatious, like whatever their problem is, they just decide not to be better people or not to like listen to the advice or just whatever. At what point are they now morally responsible for their ignorance? Because if ignorance itself gives you a pass to your moral responsibilities, what about choosing to remain ignorant?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you something funny. When I was a kid and I was in like going to church, like we, in us like middle schoolers, we used to go to like this thing called Momentum.
Oh yeah,
and
it's kind of like Awana's a little bit. Probably.
They didn't like me that much because I had asked questions that were hard for them to answer, but they did have these canned answers. So I would ask things like, "Well, how can we be upset with people in Africa who have never heard about Christianity
Right.
for not accepting Jesus? And they literally said that as a Christian, you are basically responsible for the fact that you haven't gone to Africa.
Sure.
You know, basically, they didn't say those exact words.
Sure,
but
yeah.
the fact that you haven't espoused the word to everybody is like your responsibility.
Go,
That lies
go do
with
the mission.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are the responsible party.
Right.
Yeah. So like, I do, I see, I remember I was raised as a Baptist Christian as well. And they definitely espoused something similar. For them, it was more like, oh, you know, they're absolved though. It's like
Really?
if a baby dies and the baby hadn't been, it's not about necessarily being baptized. It's more like if the baby wasn't old enough to hear the word and accept the word, then they get a pass, and it was in God's will for them to die for whatever reason.
Right. Well, a baby can't be evil anyway. But I mean,
that's
a kid in Africa who's a murderer could be, and he's never heard about these.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah. So it's
ideas.
so the same answer applies though across the board for at least the demographic that I grew up within. You know, the branch of Christianity, but. Ultimately though, yeah, it's all about like, I always ask the question to myself. It's like, okay, well, am I morally responsible for the things that I don't know that I do?
Right.
So like, maybe I am, or like I have so many books. I have the opportunity to read. I have the opportunity to talk to other people. I live in privilege. So like maybe you know, if I am ignorant, is it because I'm choosing to remain ignorant? Like I'm just like lazy and not doing the work.
Right.
Or is it true? Like I'm always asking these questions of myself because I'm always trying to be the best version of myself, but I'm always failing to be the best version of myself, just like everyone else, because we're just human beings living in a frustrating universe that we can't ever seem to win or escape from, even if we are winning.
Right.
But yeah, all this started from the fucking spider, man. Like all this started from me killing that spider.
Well, it makes me think of like the fact that like we're not transparent to ourselves. We get
Right.
possessed by certain emotions.
Right.
We get inhabited by certain impulses that really we like if you have a lot of discipline, you can have some autonomy
It's
over.
the fun
but,
house of mirrors, dude.
Right.
Whether it be biology or someone in front of you or a book you read yesterday that affected you or like a movie you watched or your upbringing, like whatever it is, you're being constantly affected by the whole reality construct around you.
That's true too. Is it's your external environment is also kind of mimetically dictating your behavior.
Yeah, it's all a reflective process. And then so you can choose how to reflect that back. And it's kind of like the ultimate idea of willfulness, right? Because you have a decision to make instead of just reacting like an animal. And that comes from the higher faculties of thought. And not everyone's been trained in that. Not everyone has practiced. It's a practice.
Well, but even if
it's
you
like
know,
a muscle.
but yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to say. Is even if you know, you have to reinforce it constantly for it to become secondary or like your innate reaction.
Right.
Because like if you are so used to waking up every day at noon, but you want to be an early bird.
Right.
It's going to take a lot. I went through that personally. It's going to take a lot of self-discipline to just like force yourself to get up even when it's miserable and you hate it.
You have to do
but
it.
eventually, like me doing that, I've gotten to a point where I can't sleep in past 8 now.
Yeah, and that took willful effort, right?
Right.
From like higher faculties.
Like I'd get up and I'd just be like, fuck, I just like every bone in my body wants to go back to sleep, but I'd force myself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'd force myself to stay up.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, and again, it's practice.
Right.
And if we were just continuing to be reflections of our external environment, we would never do the things that were hard.
Right.
It always is going to take some level of like discipline and effort. And we'll never win, right? Like even if I try my absolute best to be the most Zen guru ever and never hurt any animal or insect ever, I live in a home. I live in a house. So many insects were killed for this house to be built. And I drive a car every day.
Right.
Or I used to before COVID, right?
Yeah.
And I eat food to survive, and I unconsciously eat meats, and I eat vegetables which are grown with pesticides that are killing insects. Like no matter what you do,
or when someone, or a lot of people don't know this, but some people make the argument that vegetation actually causes more animal death because they come and try to eat the vegetation. You have to kill them.
Yeah, and then there's like the whole moral dilemma of like factory farming, giant amounts of meats and things, and all of the resources that we dump in to feed the cows, all the grain, and to grow all, just to make sure that it's all the water that's wasted and everything.
Right.
So like, what's the moral? There's so much shit that you're doing wrong, even when you're trying to do things right. And a lot of it stems from ignorance, and a lot of it stems from just your limitation as a human being in the world. And that's why I use the term like, what can you afford to do? because I can't necessarily afford to stop eating. I can't afford to not move about my space, right? I can't afford to not live. Otherwise, I would die. And it goes right back to that whole survival of the fittest, sort of like biological, natural selection, everybody eat everybody, will to live that Arthur Schopenhauer, the pessimist philosopher, talks about. So Arthur Schopenhauer talks about the will to live as being this like all-encompassing force that exists beyond all human beings, all creatures, all animals, that forces us to literally consume each other such that we might live. So alchemically, there's a symbol of the Ouroboros, which is the snake that eats its own tail. And we're going to talk about this a lot in other episodes.
Yeah, but does Schopenhauer delineate the difference in how we can actually think about that future?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah, for sure. Like human beings, just like, I heard Jordan Peterson say one time, being human is the hardest thing ever, right? Because we know that we're going to die. We have foresight, hindsight. We have social constructs where we have to behave in certain ways. Just like straight up, we have so much meta-referential knowledge that life is a burden now, instead of us just like being in the quote unquote like Garden of Eden.
Right, but the utility of it is that we know that we have a finite amount of time, so we know that we only have a limited amount of time to get everything that we need to get done.
Right, so then we can weigh against that and become better people, or live rightly, right? Or like do life correctly.
Right, it's not like you can't be hedonistic till you're 90 and then decide to change.
And, I'm gonna get it together and get my degree and go make money. Yeah, and provide for my family that doesn't exist anymore, or whatever. But I mean, and that's an opposite spectrum of the same exact phenomena, right?
Right.
Phenomenon. So more union of opposites.
Shout out to the union of opposites.
Yeah, again, straight up, because you can tackle any situation any way you want because of the reason, the will, and the intellect. Schopenhauer cuts it up into multiple pieces, like we have the will to live, and we have the reason, and we have intellect, and we have all these things, and what it means to be like a sovereign, conscious being living in the world.
Right.
Kind of talks a little bit about, being under duress. Actually, to go back a little bit, the conversation was about like having a gun up to your head, right? And then like you have the decision, you can't make it. Schopenhauer talks often about being in a court of law for things that you've done that were, morally debased, and, you did something terrible while you were drunk. You were inhibited. You were like under the influence of alcohol, toxic shit, like mucking up your conscious awareness such that the decisions that you made were not actually made with like full integrity of mind. So can you be actually held responsible for your decisions? And that's a big philosophical, moral question that we can talk about. The next thing Schopenhauer likes to, that he kind of brings up is the whole under duress thing. Like if someone's holding a gun against you. Then the next thing he talks about is sort of like if you're delusional, or if you have like dementia, or if you literally are ignorant to the fact of the things that you're doing. He brings up all these topics to talk about like sovereignty and what it means to be a wholly conscious, wholly individuated individual, and at what level should you be held responsible. And I think that in our Western tradition, in sort of our courts of law, there are things that sort of represent that as well. Like if you're a minor, you don't get as harsh punishments.
Right. You'll oftentimes find in wills, like when someone writes out their will, that they write specifically that I was sober and in a good state of mind when I wrote this.
Exactly. Yeah. And it all goes back to these like, these conversations, these philosophical debates on morality and ethics. Mm-hmm. And it's really, it's ultimately about like exactly that. Like, what does it mean to be a whole person? What does it mean to have a sober state of mind? And what does it mean to make choices and decisions? And all of these questions, which can go so many directions, ultimately lead to this discussion of morality and ethics, such as I'm questioning myself about killing a spider in my house. But the last thing that Schopenhauer says is he talks about, inebriation and thinking moral dilemmas about, it's like on the tip of my tongue, man. Why can't I remember this? Well, let me just pause and maybe it'll come back to me. About drinking, though, if we get lost in the question of like, if we're inebriated or if we have dementia, we're not really morally responsible, then the question can like move backwards in time, in like physical space, and be like, you should be morally responsibly held accountable for getting drunk. It's like if you can't be held accountable for fucking that girl when you were drunk and your wife's pissed at you now.
But the fact that you got drunk to the place where you couldn't necessarily make proper decisions is kind of on you.
That's on you.
Right.
And so that should be held, you should be held accountable for that.
Agreed.
And sometimes I'm like, oh man, psychedelics or, like cannabis or these harmless substances that are actually really positive for humanity and can help us learn and really show us new perspectives and open new doors to us, dissolve barriers and help us unify opposites. I see the argument again as well, though, for like why those things are made illegal.
There's a really interesting story. We don't have to talk about it too much, but man, I wish I knew his name. He's a rapper. He has a feature with Mac Dre, and he literally did PCP and like, cannibalized somebody.
Whoa.
But he's a normal dude. Like,
Yeah.
from when I watch his interviews of him and from when he's in jail, it seems like he really regrets what he did, and he wasn't in the he was in such a state of mind that was so radically different from normal sober consciousness that it just somehow he committed this act.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do believe he belongs in jail, of course.
For what he did. I mean, it's so hard to talk about these things.
But
because you did something in physical reality. But,
right.
And
it manifested as real consequences that not only affected the person that he did that to, but their family, and
right.
had a ripple impact.
Some restitution or like some.
Well, that's what the law is for.
Yeah.
It's to right the wrongs of in physical reality.
And we do the best that we can, I think. Although every human endeavor is susceptible to corruption and poor systems and bureaucracy. I think the law tries really hard to embody these principles of sober-mindedness and, whether or not you are under duress, if you can be morally responsible. It tries really hard, I think. And it tries really hard to ensure that bad shit doesn't happen to people.
Right.
Like you've got rules of the road. You have to have licenses.
Yeah.
You have to have licenses to drive, but you have to go through all these bureaucratic red tapes.
I guess I've had some weird feelings though in the past about, my mom would tell me stories like, oh, this guy, he wasn't really paying attention on the road and he hit a kid and the kid died and he went to jail forever. It's like, oh, I don't know if man. I believe that.
Yeah.
That he should. There's got to be a way to tell whether,
Well, I'm not a law student, but there are ways for, there have been, people have arbitrated the consequences, in serious discussions, came to create laws and rules of codes of conduct, and also laws about how laws should be enacted and punishments carried out and things like that. And, we have a system. It's not the greatest system. I don't always agree that we should, outlaw all psychedelics and drugs that could potentially be harmful because they're also potentially good.
Right.
We can't necessarily, the red tape that protects us, I said that twice. The red tape that ensures that we, don't get crashed into by some kid on the road made sure he went through a program or at least an exam.
Yeah. You have to wonder that if it wasn't a law that you could go to jail for life for accidentally committing manslaughter with your car, would more people be more negligent in the road?
Sure. And I think that's the case.
Right.
100%. And that, talking about Nietzsche and whether or not Nietzsche and Kant and Schopenhauer, all of these philosophers talking about ethics. It's like, are you ethical for the sake of being ethical? Are you ethical for the sake of doing the right thing? Should I save that spider because I want to embody love for all beings and I want to ensure that all things are sovereign and get to exist and have their life? Or am I not killing that spider because I'm fearful if I kill that spider, I'll be punished?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Or are you channeling your love to your family instead of that spider?
Right.
Because you don't want that spider to affect your family.
There's so many levels. It's
Right.
like, maybe also too, with fear, it's like maybe I'm worried that my karma is going to be bad because I killed that spider. So now I'm not going to kill the spider because I want good karma. It has nothing to do with the spider. Your intention has nothing to do with real ethical goodness. It has everything to do with fear for yourself or fear of punishment.
Isn't that like a new age conceptualization of karma though? A little bit?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Like the idea that I'm going to do something good just so I can get something beneficial in the future.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because karma, it's more like we're human beings. We live in our dharma. We can't escape it. Like dharma,
it's the path of
it
action.
means the path. Yeah, it means the path of action. It's like these blinders, or I guess it's like if human beings were to be a bowling alley, it's like the bumpers. Right. They get put up. It's the domain. It's the brackets around a mathematical equation. And although in reality you can have one single mathematical equation or statement or whatever, and you can move the brackets around however you want, and there's all these cool different things and different numbers will shoot out and different results will happen. God or whatever, or this higher power or whatever it is, circumstance, nature is the one that sets those brackets. Individuals don't usually get to change their brackets. The fact that human beings, when it comes to very Eastern ideas, have the ability to like reason and use higher orders of faculties of the mind, such as language and morality and ethics and things like this. That's all within our Dharma.
Right.
So it is within our Dharma. It's within our brackets that we can change certain things.
Yeah.
But I sometimes question, like, how far can we actually change things to the point where we can change our actual Dharma?
Yeah. Well, I wonder, like, if you actually comprehensively looked at all the actions you've ever taken in life, would you somehow be able to make sense of the fact that you're here in this chair talking to me right now?
Right.
Like, does it make more sense if you have this wider purview of all the actions that led up to it?
That's kind of like the determinism question.
Yeah.
It's almost
I thought about that earlier,
yeah,
actually.
it reminds me of like the free will versus determinism,
Yeah.
which we have an episode coming up on that for
Yep.
sure, of union of opposites. But yeah, it's a big question. So, you know, with Dharma and karma and things, if your Dharma is set by these certain brackets and no matter what you can do, you can't change that, then you can only operate, you know, within the realm of that domain, no matter what you do. So it's like you're kind of a slave to that. There's nothing you can do. So
Right.
you might as well live it and it kind of like leads into the nihilism versus like everything means something versus it's all within our Dharma, though, because we're human beings and we can think about things and it's all within our path.
But you question that a little bit.
Right, yeah, and then that leads up to karma, right?
Right.
So the question of karma was, you know, it's a new age idea. It's very misconceptualized. People don't understand it. It's like if I do something good happens. If I do something bad happens. It's not necessarily one for one. It's more like if I'm existing within the confines of my Dharma, then everything is on a set path of like sort of determinism.
Right.
Everything will have its outcome, no matter what. So it's not always good to good and bad to bad. It just means like your actions will have reactions, and it's all within the domain of that Dharma, within that path.
Right.
And sometimes I question whether or not we can change that Dharma. And if we could change the Dharma, it's probably part of our Dharma that we are able to change the Dharma at all. Thus, we have not really escaped our Dharma. I don't think there's any situation in which we can escape Dharma. No being can ever.
Would you say like Dharma is like the parameters, but
Yeah.
in the Eastern idea that we have the ability to change our own parameters?
Right, and that's still part of the parameters in which you are able to do things as a human being. Like I think about it, you know, everything has its purpose and everything has its Dharma, right? Like a carrot has Dharma. Whatever that means for the carrot, it has its own path, it has its own like life and death cycle.
Right.
And it serves purposes, and it serves different purposes for different creatures. And so if we were to believe that there's an objective absolute reality out there somewhere, carrot has like some mathematical function in which in all of the realities or all of the potentials for all creatures and all instances in which that carrot can interface and interact with the rest of the cosmos, it exports this like mathematical equation which then says like, oh, this is all of the potential that this carrot has. And carrot has like this much potential. I'm like holding up my fingers in like the small emoji, you know, where I'm like pinching.
Yeah.
Carrot has like this much, but the whole cosmos is like as large as the whole earth. And a carrot has like as much as like a penny. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm just like, it's arbitrary. It doesn't matter. The point is carrot has so much potential to interface and actually make certain levels of change occur. And I view the world and the cosmos in this way. All things are constantly in flux and in motion. It's very woo-woo, new age, quantum physicist level saying to say like all things are moving, all things are in vibration, nothing is still, everything is in flux. That's a Hermetic principle even. We have an episode coming out on the Hermetic principles. All things are in motion, right? I think of Dharma in this way and karma, because of my actions, are also motions of the cosmos. Just in the same way that molecules bump into other molecules, which then cause other molecules to bump into other ones, and it causes these like cascading events to occur. Just in this sort of like hard deterministic function that you talked about earlier.
Right.
Hard determinism. Carrot has like a level of potential that will affect the reality construct in a certain way.
Are you talking about like a carrot?
A carrot.
Okay.
Yeah, like a carrot or
Got
like
it.
literally anything. A pencil.
Just making sure it's not like some
Doesn't matter.
concept I'm not.
Yeah, no, it's like in all time
Okay.
and all space. Like a pencil can only affect the reality construct in certain levels, no matter, even if that pencil was held by every human being and every animal and had like all of its functions in all of the multiverses, everything with this pencil occurred.
But then there's the
only,
idea of like the butterfly effect.
Right. Well, like, yeah, it has these amazingly large effects that are compounding, but pencil itself, in terms of its own potential for immediate reaction, not talking about the whole entirety of the butterfly effect, but for pencil's immediate reaction and causation on the world and the universe has so much that it can do and then it can't anymore.
Right.
Like I can't take a pencil and like start my engine with a pencil. Like, but maybe I could make a vehicle that I can. But pencil is still limited to that vehicle. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So it's a weird example, but what I'm trying to say is like
on the other end of that spectrum, if you give someone a pencil who never had a pencil in their life or a pen, they might turn out to be this great artist or writer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So pencil has like a level of effect on everything, but there is a degree in which pencil can no longer have an effect on all possible scenarios and outcomes because of the hard limitations of pencil's pencilness. Right? It's still a pencil.
Right.
A pencil is not a diamond. A pencil is not a penis that can give birth to another human being. There's still levels in which pencil, although it can do all these things,
But it really can't be quantified. Maybe a pencil has more potential than we give it credit for.
Sure, and I'm not saying I know. I definitely don't know how much potential. Just like Kurt Gödel proved.
I think that's why people use the butterfly for the butterfly.
Yeah,
It's just a butterfly flapping its wings.
Exactly.
But the idea is that
you can't
arbitrary things that are so small actually have this major impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to go back
Which
to
is kind
the
of what you're saying.
free will determinism thing, like people who espouse free will say free will exists because it feels like it.
Right.
Hard determinists are like, no, hard determinism is real because only if we had the computing power to know the whole butterfly effect, we would know all of the events in reality as they occur, right? So to say if we had all the computing power, I'm saying that pencil has still a limited level of faculty in which it cannot affect other aspects of reality because it's limited by pencilness. And although it's this vast thing that it can't affect, right? There's still levels where it can't. There's still pockets of space and time that it just can't affect and can't touch. So far removed. And you could almost think of its entire lifetime across all spectrums of time and space as like a single molecule. Like that Venn diagram of like what pencil can do and what pencil can't do is like what it can do is a molecule. And there's all these molecules in all of the spaces and times of potentialities. And just as like atoms bounce into atoms, which cause other events to occur, which cause wind to move, which cause oceans to rise, which cause life to form, which all these things occur and things move about in this sort of hard determined way. And now you and I, billions and billions of years after the big dawn of time, are here having this exact conversation because of all of the motions of everything. I view these like potentialities and hyperdimensional constructions in very similar ways where certain things are tangential and touching to other things. Like pencilness can interface with humans and humanness in a way where actual like butterfly effecting can happen, right?
You're right.
But there's certain pockets of reality in which like pencilness cannot interface with somethingness such that like they're totally removed from each other. And if I think of it from this like weird metaphor of like atoms bumping into each other, some atoms bump into each other, which cause events to cascade, which cause other things to happen and nuance to occur and evolution to occur.
So this may be the wrong question, but you can tell me. And please, don't hesitate to tell me if this is the wrong question. But
sure.
I have this feeling that this somehow relates to the Funhouse of Mirrors.
It does. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Because the Funhouse of Mirrors is like, it's the concept of all concepts for me in my philosophy of like looking at all of the spectrums and all of the levels in which. And this is going to be way too big to unpack right now. I'm just going to say yes, it does have something to do with the Funhouse of Mirrors. I'll just say that.
Right.
Absolutely.
To me, it sounds like what you're saying is if we could all be more conscious of the fact that we were in something akin to a Funhouse of Mirrors, we might be able to transcend the current state that we find ourselves in.
Right. And that is still part of our Dharma, in which it's frustrating because we're still doing what we're meant to do as human beings. And it's not like we're special or we're like somehow defeating our fate and we're becoming God despite God telling us that we're just pieces of shit on a rock or whatever. Like that's what I'm refuting. It's that it's still within the realm of what we are supposed to be doing with our humanness. And the whole like metaphor of atoms bumping into each other was moving forward a train of thought, which I'll skip the rest because really it's for the sake of time and me just yelling at people and yelling at you. We'll skip all the stuff, but the conclusion is that like everything has potential and everything has its limitation, and these potentials and limits and like infinities within infinities, and having a conscious understanding of your own potential to a level in which you can actually do something about it, even if it's within your Dharma still, is worth it, but it's frustrating. It's like you can never escape your own purpose. you are limited to the things that are bumping into you that you're bumping into. All you can really control is like somewhat the direction that you're going in after you've been bumped into. Something's going to hit you from behind and you're going forward, but you have a little bit of a decision to go forward and left or forward and right. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's always a decision. There's always a splitting path in front of you. So
you ever heard the philosophical question of if you put two of the same bowls of food next to a dog, one to the right, one to the left, which one does he go to?
No, I've never heard that.
You never heard that?
No, which one does it go to?
I mean, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Because they're both the same, really. Mm-hmm. They both ultimately lead to the same
conclusion.
Right.
The will to live
right.
from Schopenhauer. Some dog's going to eat some other dog or something, and then they'll live and they'll get eaten.
Right.
Yeah, that's why Schopenhauer's a pessimist, right? Because he feels like it's just this infinite chasm of fuckery that you can't escape. Kind of like I'm saying, but where I'm much more optimistic about it, he's much more pessimistic. Schopenhauer actually he says something where it's like to live as a human being is just like a glimpse. It's like a fleeting moment in which it's like two poles of infinity, mm-hmm. and you're just in the middle of those two poles as a fleeting instant. And in that instant, all human life is a running away from and a balancing between boredom and pain. And it's so pessimistic because it's like if you look at the world like that's like literally everything that you do is to avoid pain.
Isn't that kind of like Peterson's order and chaos type thing?
Yeah, a little bit, just with different words. It's an archetype for sure. Yeah. Archetype. Shout outs archetypes. They're everywhere. You can't escape them. But yeah, I mean he like because you're running away from pain, right? Like, but then you become bored, and because you're so in a house not doing anything.
Then you go skydiving.
Yeah, I'm not stomping on spiders anymore because I've eradicated all spiders, but now I'm bored because there's no threat, right?
Right.
So and then you just bounce between these things. You go skydiving, now you're terrified, but then all this stuff, right? He's very
That's
pessimistic.
full circle though. It brings us right back to the spider.
Right back to the spider. So I've been kind of like going on very many tangents with you right now, trying to lace things together. We'll revisit these ideas. We'll revisit the idea of the funhouse. We'll revisit the idea of like moral responsibility, which we have already in other episodes that we've recorded. But I guess I'm just trying to get across to people who are listening or watching. If there's anything that I'm trying to say out of this that I'm saying with you, it's like having some self-knowledge and referencing yourself in a meta way, looking at yourself objectively, will help you see those brackets that are around you, to see your Dharma, studying, learning, finding out what your limits are, and then trying to push past those limits. I'm personally frustrated because that whole process is part of our process. Like that whole process is built into our Dharma from a Eastern perspective. It's like the Chinese finger tricks. Like the more that you try to pull away from it, the tighter it gets around you, and it's frustrating. That's like life as a human being.
Right.
Nothing that you do will escape that. But asking these questions that can never be answered, that have been asked for ages and ages and ages, like moral, ethical questions or questions on the nature of being.
Absolutism versus relativism.
Exactly that. These are all questions that there are no real hard answers to because, in my opinion, no matter what you say, because reality is so frustrating, because of the nature of these like potentialities within potentialities and the butterfly effect and everything.
The inevitable result is contradiction.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's my personal philosophy that contradiction, and this might lose a lot of people, and maybe we'll cut it here. And we'll talk about it another day. And I'm also writing about it.
We will for sure do either a discourse or a lecture, probably both, on contradiction itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because I'm writing a series of books, of 3 philosophy books. I reference them all the time. And, more of this idea will be there. But at the highest level of reality, that like what human beings can come into contact with and know is real, it's contradiction at the height of it. And really, it's not. I'm not saying contradiction is the truth. I'm saying that our understanding of the truth leads us to contradiction.
Or the path of our understanding to the truth is
our Dharma.
Yeah.
Ultimately is obfuscating and confusing, and we can never beat it. Which is ultimately like the Maya, right?
The illusion.
The illusion. It is built in such a way where we can never win.
By the way, another word for Maya is the bridge, which is actually a great way to substantiate the idea that everything is contradiction. It's like a bridge between two ideas opposites that contradict each other.
Yeah, it's a triangle, is a Pythagorean triangle, the triune, the Trinity. We were talking about Jesus earlier. All of the Protestants out there and Catholics, all about the Trinity, and the number 3 is fundamental because it's like unifying two opposites through a third, which then gives rise to a new fundamental.
1 gives birth to 2, 2 gives birth to 3, and 3 gives birth to
the
all
multiplicity,
things. Yeah.
and that's in the Tao,
Right.
the Tao Te Ching. And so many different cultural references to this, to number 3 being fundamental to reality, triangle being the first, geometrical shape in Euclidean geometry and all this stuff. There's so many things about like the unification of opposites becoming transcendent and evolving into other things, which then propagate into other more nuanced evolutionary processes. And it's very contradictory because you're like, from nothing came something, and then from something came everything, and it's this weird process. And I'm going on so many tangents.
Right.
Oh my God! But to just bring it right back
to the spider.
To the spider, it's like. For me, it's like I realize no matter how hard I try, I'm still going to live and die, and it's frustrating. No matter how hard I try, I'm never going to know everything. No matter how hard I try, I will still be morally responsible for things that I was not aware of for different reasons that we've reasoned out and we will continue to reason out. So it's like I fight this constant nihilism, and it's like, okay, well, why do I try to do the things that I try to do? And it has to do with choosing to be an optimist. Like, ultimately, at the end of the day, you only have your will, your reason, your intellect, and your faculties.
Because what better choice do you have?
Right. You have to choose it. And it's part of my Dharma to choose that rather than the negative path.
Right.
And then I'm trying to integrate the negative path with the positive to transcend.
Right.
Because I feel like I'm so frustrated, stuck in this process of duality.
Like, it's not like you're saying that there isn't these great arguments for why you should be negative and why you should be, you should assume the worst. It's just the point is that the pragmatic solution is to not do that, to choose the more positive path.
Yeah, and oftentimes I find myself getting caught up as well in like thinking about thinking, in which like pragmatism is so far removed from that whole process. Sometimes you just do it for the sake of the thing itself, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, pragmatism will really like anchor you down. Really, it's like I want to continue eating and living and talking and enjoying myself. So.
And not having spiders in your garage.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, maybe I'll stomp that spider out for whatever reason or other I've contrived, but
because we had this conversation, you're not going to kill the next spider you see.
Or maybe I will.
Or maybe you will.
And life is complicated, man. Mm-hmm. I'm just a human being. I guess the last thing I'll say, because there is no conclusion to this right now. There is no conclusion to how...
This might be a part 2 here.
Yeah, like where this discussion has gone, we may have to pick it back up at another time, but... I'm just glad that I'm not being like curb stomped by hyperdimensional reality right now. But maybe that's what life is. Maybe that's like when you get a cavity and you've been brushing your teeth and doing everything good, but somehow maybe your lifestyle changed. You got a cavity in your mouth and it hurts. Maybe that's like one of your spider legs got ripped off by a kid who tried to stomp you and you scurried away in hyperspace and you have no idea. Maybe dying itself is like the end of your rope when it's your time, quote unquote. Maybe that's just hyperspace BJ stomping on me, this spider who has no real understanding of anything that's going on in that space. Who knows?
Who knows?
I'm just glad that I'm not dead right now, man.
Like that spider right there.
Like that spider that I should probably scoop up and give him a proper burial.
Yeah, we can. Actually, we will, and for the sake of
his critter friends are gonna come conglomerate around him, and then I'm gonna have to stomp on more spiders, and I'll have more moral dilemmas.
Dharmas to deal with,
and more karma dharma. Yeah. And I'm gonna be tripping. I don't like tripping.
Well.
We won't incriminate ourselves today. All right. Well, I mean, that being said, man, I really enjoyed this conversation with you, although there was no real resolution or conclusion. But
this one will ultimately require a part 2.
Or 3 or 4.
Or 3 or 4.
At least 3, because 3 is fundamental.
But that gives you something to look forward to more.
Yeah. So, hey, everybody, thanks for hanging out. If you really enjoyed this conversation, stay tuned for my books. Come back for more of our content. We love you guys. Thank you. You can find us everywhere. Links will post in the YouTube description. Spotify, Facebook, Google, all the places. I'm not even going to say it all. Thanks for coming. We love you.
And thank you for joining us and continuing the great conversation.